All right, so we're going to see the Gemara again on Yud Beis Amud Beis. We need to see it. There's a little more than what we saw. We have to see a little more so that we'll have a bigger picture of what we're talking about. And just pointing out that this Gemara precedes the dinim of Bar Metzra. Okay, it precedes Bar Metzra and it precedes Gud Ogud. Okay, so let's pick it up with. Again, we at the two dots. We started there at the two dots. Let's start there again. Amar Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua Pshita Chelik Bechor V'Chelik Pashut Yavinin Le'Echad Meitzra. That certainly the Bechor and the Pashut, the Bechor is entitled to demand without a lottery. The Bechor is entitled to demand the middle section, and they only do a lottery on the outside sections, so that the Bechor definitely ends up with two contiguous pieces of property, and there shouldn't be a lottery where he may end up with where the Pashut may end up with the one in the middle, and the Bechor gets the two outside properties. That is certainly not appropriate. But the question is whether the Yavam has the same din as the Bechor. And again, the Gemara has psukim and it darshans psukim. Okay, now continue. Now the case. Hahu de Zavan Ara, Ametzra debei Nishaya. Right. So the case is that a Reuven had a field adjacent to his father's estate, and then the father dies, and now they got to split up the properties. And there's three fields. One of the three fields is adjacent. One of the three fields is adjacent to Reuven's previously purchased property, and therefore Reuven wants to get in the division of the three lots of the three pieces of three parcels. Reuven wants to get the parcel that's adjacent to his property without a lottery. Okay, so Haud Zavan Ara Ametzra de Bein Nishaya Kiko Palgu. When they come to divide it, Omar Le, he says to his brothers, Pligu li Ametzrai. Please let's divide it and give me the property that's adjacent to mine, and you guys take the other two and make a lottery on the other two. So let's not make a mistake. And this is we're going to be answering the beginning of the answer to your question. Is that this has you'll notice that we're not quoting Vasisa HaYashar V'Hatov. Okay? Midas Zdom is more chamur than Asisa HaYashar V'Hatov. Kofin al Midas Zdom, meaning Zen Nene V'Zel Lo Chaser. That's what it means, Kofin al Midas Zdom. Says Rashi, al Midas Zdom, it's a little bit higher up. Zen Nene V'Zel Lo Chaser. All right, I will, before we get to the continuation, I just want to remind you where this came up in another context that we did, and that was in the Zenan of V'Zel Lo Chaser, when a person lives when Reuven lives in Shimon's house, where there's absolutely no loss to Shimon. So Reuven has Hana'ah and Shimon has no loss. So as long as Reuven is not one who would normally have to pay for rent, and therefore he has no financial gain, and Shimon never rents out his house, so there's no financial loss. So on that, everybody agrees that Reuven does not have to pay rent. Okay, if you remember that, that's Hadar b'chatzar chavero shelo birshus. So as long as the house is never rented, and the person living there never rents, he has access to free housing, but he chose to live there, he's pater. That was Zen Nene V'Zel Lo Chaser. But we pointed out at the time that if Shimon is there, Shimon's about to go on a trip, and Reuven tells Shimon, I want to live in your house because it's Zen Nene V'Zel Lo Chaser, Shimon certainly has the right to stop Reuven from living there. In other words, that whole discussion was after the fact. But before the fact, Reuven cannot force Shimon to let him live there. What happened to Kofin al Midas Zdom? We talked about that then. Why don't we say to Reuven, why can't Reuven come to Beis Din and say, Shimon has to let me live there because Kofin al Midas Dom and Zen Nene V'Zel Lo Chaser? And if you guys remember the sugya, the answer is that would be a compromise on Shimon's ownership. Shimon's bailus. Shimon has a right to stop people from living in his house. Okay? And therefore you can't say Kofin al Midas Dom, Zen Nene V'Zel Lo Chaser if that compromises the ownership rights. After the fact, we could say that Reuven doesn't have to pay because he didn't gain anything from Shimon and Shimon didn't lose anything. But that Shimon should not be allowed to stop him That's certainly not true. That's not under the rubric of the kofin al midas dom. So here the question is whether this is kofin al midas dom. So Rabbah says kofin al midas dom because zedan of zelo chaser. Look, there are 3 fields. All the fields are worth equal value. So why shouldn't Ruvain, who bought a field adjacent to the estate, be able to demand the field adjacent to his? And because the other brothers aren't losing anything because every field is worth the same amount of money. Maskifla of Yosef, Amrile Achai Ma'alinan le'iluya ki naskhi de berberio. We assess that this field, what they're saying is, we think this field is more valuable than the other 2 fields. You say that they're all 3 equal, and in fact, even an assessor, a professional assessor, comes in and says each field is worth $100,000. They say, to us, we don't sell so fast. We think it's worth more than $100,000 to us. And therefore, the Hilchos Rav Yosef. Okay, let's go. We're going to see Tosas in a minute, and then we'll go to the Rosh. But we have to see 2 more cases. What?
The two other brothers, they sound like Midas Stone.
They're saying you can't tell us Zelo Chaser because it is Chaser. We claim we're being Chaser.
It sounds to me Stomite, totally.
Okay. So, but I want to sharpen the question, okay? Because Dan asked. So let's say we're going to give Ruvain the field on the field, okay? But why? In other, I'm sorry. Even if we wouldn't, right? Let's say we wouldn't do it. The halach is like Rabbi Yosef, and there has to be a lottery. So they had a lottery, and you know what? Reuven didn't get the adjacent field. Shimon got the adjacent field. So now, after Shimon got the adjacent field, Reuven should come to him and say, "Here's money. Leave the field, right? And dinner to bar mitzvah." We don't say that. That was Dan's question. We're going to keep that question in the back of our minds for a few minutes. Just see the next couple of Gemaras. Says the Gemara, 2 more cases. Okay. Trey Arasa, Atre Nagre. There are 2 pieces of parcels of land that they're inheriting. All right. And each one borders a river. And Reuven's, and one of the fields, besides bordering a river, also borders Reuven's property. So Reuven says, I want to get the property that borders mine. And it's next to a river, and Shimon's taina Amarabba Kagon Zekofin al Midas Dom Maskifla Rav Yosef Zimnin the high Madvil the high low Madvil. Shimon can come along and say, wait a minute, these rivers are not equal, because sometimes one river gives good water and the other one dries up, and therefore I want to split, and each of us should have half a field. Each of us should have access to both rivers. In other words, Reuben's going to have to compromise and only get a half a field adjacent to him, so that each field can be adjacent to part of each field will have a partial adjacency to part of the rivers. Okay, and on that we say Hilchos Rav Yosef that Reuven that Shimon has a right to say, I don't want to take the one that's next to one river and give you the one that's next to the other river, which is next to your property, because I have a right to be adjacent to both rivers, and that overrides Reuven's claim of bar mitzvah. The Hilchos Rav Yosef, we agree. But now look at the other case. Okay, what's the Bach there? Let me remember the Bach. All right, Tarti Arasa Achad Nagra. Okay, there is 2 fields with 1 river. Okay, and Reuven has adjacency to one of those fields. So what's the story? Go to Rashi. Rashi is Tarte. Okay, it's four lines before it gets wide. This is a tricky case because we're going to have a reverse shita. Tarti arasa yesh lahem lachlok al chad nagra. So there's 1 river with 2 pieces of land. The echad mehem kana karkao etzel ha'achas. Okay, so we've got 2 pieces of property. Okay, and a river. Kofin al midas dom, the kaven de echad nagraninu shtehem shavos. Meaning there's a river going across the whole top of the land, and there's basically three pieces of property. Reuven has one, and then the estate had two other properties. Okay, and there's a river across them. So again, I'm going to try it. Reuven has the right field. Right, left. Reuven has field on the right side. Okay, then there are two more fields, and the river goes across all three of them. Okay, so Reuven says, I should get the field that's next to mine, and you take the outer field. You guys following? Okay, and Shimon says, we have to do a lottery. Okay, so Amar Rav Yosef Kegonzeh Kofen al Miras. In the other case where there were two rivers, there could be a claim this river might dry up, this river, I want access to both rivers. I want half of my property to have access to both rivers rather than take full property on one river and you get the other river, because maybe one river will dry up, one river won't. But here we got all one river. So now Reuven wants the field that's adjacent to his field. And Shimon says, no, I want a lottery because maybe I will end up with the field between your field and the outer field, and I'll be in the middle. Okay, says Rav Yosef, that's Kofen al Midas Dom. This is the Rav Yosef that earlier said that as long as there's a good argument, we're not Kofen al Midas Dom. So Abaya turns on Rav Yosef and says, back in the Gemara, Maskif la Abaye matzi amar beina de afishe arise. I have an advantage that you should take the outer field and I'll get the middle field. Why? Because if you have the outer field, if you have the two outer fields, you have to hire sharecroppers for both outer fields. And my inner field is more protected because since you have workers on both outside fields, I won't need to hire so many workers to protect my inside field. We're not here talking about workers. We're talking about watchmen. Okay, so that's his claim. Says Rashi, Nichali lafushe arisi, tovli, sados achas mikan v'achas mikan. It's good for me that you should have two fields on the two sides of my fields. The achas li be'emtza, and I should have one in the middle. Kedei shetarbe lecha arisin v'tehi sados shali mishtameres yafet. My middle field will be better protected. So he's trying to negate the Midas Sdom claim of the brother by saying, I have a benefit. Says Rav Yosef, all right? I'm sorry, right? Maskif la Abaya matzi amar beina dafishi arisi. Hilchos akir Rav Yosef, that there is Midas Sdom there because afushe, the vav, the bach. Because afushe arisi lav milsehi. That's not a fair claim. It's not a fair claim to take advantage of the fact, right? That you want to try to take advantage of it. And that's not a claim for zen and of his elochas. Okay, and therefore there is a deficiency for Reuven, and Shimon's benefit is not a fair benefit. Okay, that's basically what we needed. We could see one more Gemara. Yeah, we'll see one more Gemara just to see how we implement the zen and of his elochaser. Okay, top of the next page. Chad gisa nagwa v'chad gisa nahara. Okay, so there it says Rashi, top Rashi. Sada shel shnei achim sheyesh nahar al pnei mizrach v'nagar al pnei tzvon. One is a river and one is like a water well, some kind of an irrigation ditch. Okay, so the brother who has adjacency, he wants adjacency, but that's going to require the other brother to forego either the water well or the river. So we say palgina le bekarnazol. You have to divide it up so that everybody has access to everything. All right. In other words, one brother can't claim because of adjacency, I want all the river or all the water well, because each one has an advantage and a disadvantage, and therefore we have to get everybody. Therefore, everybody is entitled to access to all of them, and that overrides the bar mitzvah. Okay. So now, before we even see Tosfos, no, we'll do it after we see Tosfos. All right, so the question here, what is this Taina Malina Lake Kenichse de Barmeria? Right, we think it to us it's worth more money. So again, we're not gonna see the whole Tosfos. We're gonna do it in the middle. Pirush Rabbeinu Tam. It's the Tosas Ma'alinan lay. It's Tosas Ma'alinan lay. And it's the last words on the line of Pirush Rabbeinu Tam. Ma'alin kinichse de bar Meria. Meaning, what's their claim? What's their claim to avoid zenen v'zelo chaser? Lo niten lecha zchut sheyesh lonu b'soda zu im lo b'damim yikarim kamo b'nei Merion. Why? What's the unique about b'nei Merion? Shehoyu ashirim v'lo hayu mochrim karka oseim ela b'damim yikarim. In other words, these people were very wealthy. And they would never sell $100,000 field for $100,000. You want to buy our field? We don't need the cash. You're going to have to make it really worth our while. And therefore, they would sell $100,000 field. You couldn't get it unless you paid $150,000. So these brothers can claim we're that kind of people. What the assessor said it's worth $100,000. We wouldn't give up a field like that for $100,000. To us, it's worth. We demand a premium. Okay. And therefore, lo hayu mochrim karkoseim ela b'damim yikarim. The tarte arasa atreina. I'm sorry. Okay, and therefore that insulates them from zenen and v'zelo chaser because they can claim that to us it's chaser. We don't want to just give it away. Okay, yes, Daniel, you don't like it.
I just say there has to be raglaim ledover. They can't just make this up. Meaning they have to show that they are Rockefellers. Or whatever.
You see, not like that. It says their claim is Ma'alinan le kinichse de bar Merion. We are the kind of people that we want premiums. You want to buy land, we want premiums.
But why can't you say that in any bar mitzvah? What's the difference here in this case?
Okay, so you're back to Dan's question. What's the difference between every bar mitzvah and this case?
Right, you could say it's inheritance, but there's got to be something. I mean,
okay, no, we're going to see again. I'm going to remind you of a certain din in bar mitzvah, and you're going to see that the whole principle of bar mitzvah doesn't apply. We can't apply the din of bar mitzvah here, and we'll see why in a few minutes. Let's just finish the rest of the Tosfos. What about tarti arosa atre nagri lo kai uvda dehahu gavra elamilsa be'ampe nafshi? It's a new case. It's not talking about the guy who bought next to his father's estate. It's a new case. Klomar, shtei sodos, sheyesh lekol echad nagar. There are two fields, each one has its own a water system. V'rotze ha'echad sheyechalku kol achas l'shtayim, sheyika chatzi sarezu v'chatzi sarezu, that I don't want us to split, you get one field and I get the other field, but I want half of each field. This is a new case. This is nothing to do bar mitzvah, according to Tosfos. Again, you got the case. There are two fields. All right, there are two fields, okay, and each field has a water system. Now the question is, can we say you take one field, I take the other field, or can one of the brothers insist half and half? Each of us takes a half of a field. Okay, so alze amar rabat kofin al midas do v'yitol kol echad tzara shalem kidei sheyeh lekol echad chelek echad metzra. It's better for every guy wants to have a whole field. All right, and the answer is Rav Yosef says no, because sometimes this water system is better, sometimes that water system is better. He wants to get this, that there has to be, and this is what you guys wanted to, there has to be some objective claim. There has to be an objective reason, all right, why you want to be able to say that I want to split it. I don't want to split it your way. I want to split it my way because I can demonstrate why there is an advantage to my way over your way. But if the advantage is, I'm going to be able to benefit because now I have better protected fields, that's not a good claim. Okay, so now let's see why we don't
one big field in the.
I'm sorry. Question.
What's the starting point? That it's one big field or two fields that are contiguous?
Fields that are contiguous. Two fields that are contiguous, and one of them is contiguous to Reuven's. So Reuven wants the one that's next to his. Yeah, in other words, Reuven has a field, and then there are two more fields, and each of those two fields has its own water system. And Reuven wants to get the whole field next to his and give Shimon the other whole field. And Shimon's taina is, no, I want each of us to have a half a field. because each water system might not be as good as the other water system. Okay, and on that, Rav Yosef says he wins. That's not a midas dome for him to demand that. There is a tangible advantage to him. Okay, now let's find out why we don't apply bar metzra. So you guys forgot something about bar metzra. Please remember, I'll give you the extreme din of bar metzra, which shows the system. Okay, so Ruvain is the bar metzra to Shimon. And Shimon sells to Levi. Shimon sold to Levi at $100,000. Fair market value of the field, $100,000. So Ruvain hears about it, and he activates Dinah de bar metzra. And he goes to Levi and says, okay, Levi, you bought the field. I want to get you off. Okay? And the field now has depreciated in value. Or it has appreciated in value. So let's take the case of appreciation, because that's the one that's going to bother you more. Okay? So Levi paid $100,000. When Reuven comes to him, the field is now worth $110,000. And the din, if you remember, what's the din? How much money does Reuven have to pay Levi? 100 or 110? You guys got to remember the din of
on Svar, what he paid for it.
I don't want Svar. If you weren't here, if you weren't here when we studied Bar Metzra, you got to just hold. Okay, the Gemara is explicit. The Gemara is very explicit in the sugi of Bar Metzra. Reuven paid $100,000. Shimon Levi paid $100,000. Now the field is worth 110 or 90. Went up, it went down. How much does Reuven pay? Does he pay the current market value, or does he pay what Levi paid?
He pays what Levi paid.
Why?
Because he's entering the shoes of the original deal. So if the original deal was 100, he's paying 100.
I'm going to ask you to clarify your pronouns for me. Who's entering the shoes of whom?
The bar metzra is entering the shoes of the original purchaser. He's replacing him in the deal.
But it happened already. It's too late. You want to replace? Wait, you want to replace me with $100,000? Give me $100,000 for $110,000 field?
But
you got it backwards.
The fact that
you got it backwards. And this is why bar metzra is a legislation that says any time Levi buys a field adjacent to Reuven, without even realizing it, he now became Reuven's shliach. It's that Levi is Reuven's shliach. And therefore, whatever Levi did, he did it for Reuven. And therefore, if the price went up, Reuven benefits. But if the price went down, Reuven can't get rid of Levi without giving him the full 100,000, because Levi bought a field for 100,000 as Reuven's representative. That's a dinah de bar metzra, and that is legislated. It's not because of midas dom. It's a legislation of the asisa hayashar v'hatov. Midas dom doesn't need a legislation. Midas dom is either there or not there. It's an objective reality. Either it is midas dom or it's not midas dom. Whereas bar metzra required a legislation for vasisa yashar v'hatov, which in general is just a nice thing. It's a good thing. It's a good midah. It's a mitzvah. Vasisa yashar v'hatov. It's a mitzvah. Okay, but that in general is not judiciable. There's one case where Sisa Yasher Vatov is judiciable, and that's bar metzra because of legislation. So Dan, I hope you now understand that you can't activate bar metzra if we legitimately split the Yerusha through lottery. The bar metzra who lost and ended up with a field not near his, and Shimon ended up with a field near Reuven's. Reuven can't come to Shimon, who's now next to him, and say, "Take my field in the middle and give me your field," because it's a question of rights. And the brothers don't have any requirement to forego their inheritance rights. Okay? And if they have rights, then you can't get rid of them afterwards.
Right.
So bar metzra doesn't apply because you guys point to it's Yerusha, but it's more than just Yerusha. Yerusha means I have rights, and you can't force me to forego my rights. And that's really, Daniel, to help at your question also, is that it's not a sisa, it's not midas dom when I'm activating my rights. I have right, just like hadar b'chatzer chavero shelo birshus. He doesn't have to pay, but the owner can stop him before the fact. Because if you won't if you're going to force the owner to let Reuven live in the house for free, what you just did is you compromised Shimon's ownership rights. Okay? After the fact, we can say Zenen v'zelo chaser. But you can't compromise ownership rights. You're muted.
But I think I understand that case, Poshut. But the case of the two brothers who say like we are like Bar Marions.
Yerusha rights. The answer to your question is Yerusha rights. We have rights in this field, and you can't force us to forgo our rights.
It just, I mean, I let's say like this. I've been through Yerushas a few times, okay? So it seems to me like it's a very selfish, it's a not midot tovot type of thing, that if there is no loss involved, there's no loss involved.
Oh,
right?
Sure there is. Oh, of course there is.
What do you mean? For the two brothers, they're getting the same piece of land worth $1 million, just like the other brother gets $1 million field. Just that he has now a better position because he happens to own a piece of land next to it.
You might have been involved in Yerushos, but you got to have a real estate financial head also. Okay?
I have to like.
And I'm sorry, the two brothers realize that to Reuven, this field is worth more than the other two fields. True or false?
Yes.
So they now have rights in a field that to Reuven is worth $1,100,000. And therefore, they're allowed to say, therefore, it's also worth to us $1,100,000. And if you want it, you got to pass $1,100,000. That's really what they're angling for. What are they really angling for? They're angling for a premium. They're saying to Reuven, you want to get it without a lottery, then you gotta compensate us. Oh, well, we'll have a lottery, because what's going to happen if we win the lottery? You're ready to pass. You're going to pass $1.1 million to get it. If one of the brothers wins the adjacent field, Reuven will probably pay a premium. So they're activating the rights to that premium in advance. Again,
I hear it. It
takes away. Are they nice guys?
No, they're not. But
nice
it makes
guys.
sense.
They're not nice guys. Did they fulfill the Asisa Yasher v'Hatov? Probably not. But we're not in the Asisa Yasher v'Hatov, because you can't, except in one or two circles, you can't force Asisa Yasher v'Hatov. You can force Midas Dom, and they're allowed to say this isn't Midas Dom because we have more rights in the adjacent. We have built-in value in that adjacent field because the brother's ready to pay more for it. So that's part of our value in it, and therefore you can't call it Midas Dom. Are they nice guys? They're not nice guys. Did they do Vasisa Yasher Batov? They didn't do Vasisa Yasher Batov. Okay, but that'll be between them and God. All right, you understand? We're dealing here with judiciable things.
I see.
I hope everybody understands. That was a great question that Dan asked. Okay, but again, that's the distinction between Asisa Yasher Batov, which in general is not judiciable except for bar metzra, and the structure of the the structure of the legislation is to make the buyer the shliach of the bar metzra. That's the structure, okay? But that doesn't exist in any of these other cases.
Perfect. Thank you.
Are we all happy?
Yeah. Can I make a comment? Something I find very satisfying about your explanation, Rabbi Karlinsky, is that, like, sometimes you have to set down a standard just because otherwise no one knows. Like, there's always this confusion with currency deals. Oh, the currency went up and went down, and everyone says, well, pay me in shekel, pay me in dollar, or whatever it may be, because somehow everyone always thinks that it's the way that benefits them, right? Somehow you just naturally see, but I bought it in shekel, so you should pay me in shekel. So it's really satisfying what you said about, and what the Gemara said about Reuven making Levi the shaliach, is that, so now we solved the problem of what happens to the property value. It's just a model that we can all work under, right?
Exactly.
They could have come up with another way of looking at it too.
And we have all those exceptions of bar metzra. Anytime the din of bar metzra is going to compromise the rights of the seller or the rights of the buyer, then it's off, right? Now, if the seller needs cash quickly, so then Levi came in with cash quickly, and then Reuven found out about it later, You can't otherwise that would compromise the seller's rights. If every time he needs cash quickly and anybody who buys it knows he can be kicked off the land by the adjacency, then no one will ever buy it, and that compromises the rights of the seller. So therefore, we abandon the din of bar mitzvah. Okay, again, all of the examples that the Gemara gave when there isn't bar mitzvah, matana isn't bar mitzvah, etc., is because at the end of the day the only thing we have to be able to activate in a pure sense asisa hayashar v'hatov, that the buyer should be able to be told asisa hayashar v'hatov, go take your money, which is one of the reasons why nowadays it's almost unheard of to activate bar mitzvah on houses and apartments. Because you can't tell the buyer, what do we tell the buyer? Here's your money, go buy a different field. But in apartments, you can't say that. Because A, not every apartment is identical, and B, apartments aren't always so available. Okay? So in general, they don't activate bar mitzvah that way. However, if you remember the very end of the Gemara, that the evolution of bar mitzvah was that when the seller now has to choose between two buyers, there becomes a priority on who he should choose. Right, a neighbor and a Talmud Chacham, etc., etc. So that we do activate. In other words, like my son-in-law was just talking. I was just talking to my son-in-law about it. He sits on a Beis Din and he gets these cases not infrequently. So there is a guy selling an apartment, and there's a neighbor on the same floor next to the apartment, and he wants to buy it. And there's a guy above the apartment that wants to buy it. Okay, and now they're in Beis Din. All right, and each one wants to demand that the seller sell to him. Everybody's offering the same price, etc. Cash, everything is the same. Who has priority? The one who who has a priority of adjacency? The one above, so that he can build a 2-story up and down, or the one next door he can expand his apartment? Everybody hear the question?
Yeah, I have an answer.
Okay, what would you do, Pinchas? And I'll tell you what the Batei didn't do.
Well, I just happen to know that in terms of Tikkun V'niyah, it's much easier to get a heter to combine two apartments on the same floor than it is to combine two apartments on different floors. So
why? Just it's nothing to do with the halacha. Tell me why.
Because in terms of the engineering and in terms of the building code, it's much more of an exception to the rule to have two different apartments on two different floors than it is to have one big apartment on the same floor.
Interesting. Anyway, the halacha is like that. The halacha gives the priority to the person who wants to expand on the same floor than a person who wants to build 2 stories. Okay. That again, I'm not sure it's because of the building code or not, but that's certainly how the Batei Din that it expanding your apartment outward seems to be more of a compelling thing to do than to expand your apartment upwards. Again, but you see, but they're already. But this is an evolution of the din of bar mitzvah. Oh, but there's no question that if Reuven sold to a stranger the apartment next door to his, no Beis Din will say that the guy who lives next door to Reuven cannot give money to the buyer and kick him out, because the din doesn't apply, because you can't tell him, oh, asisa yashar v'atov, go take your money and go buy a different apartment, because that would definitely compromise the rights of the buyer. Asisa yashar v'atov requires we're asking him asisa hayashar v'hatov, but not to lose money or not to be terribly inconvenienced. Okay, all right. Beseder, let's see.
That's a question.
Yes, yeah. All the questions. Let's get all the questions, and then we're going to turn to the Rosh. Go ahead.
So we sort of accepted, just as a hanacha, that fields are interchangeable and apartments aren't. Just factually, it seems to me like in loads of apartment buildings, especially these big apartment buildings, 107, 108, 109, 110, they're interchangeable far more than any 2 fields could ever be. Okay, so do you think that there may be a reason why we don't say it about apartments is we don't want to apply it? No.
Okay, so first of all, you don't live in the agrarian society that existed in the time of the Gemara. Okay, and therefore you're making an assumption that's not correct about agricultural fields.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And by the way, that's what the Gemara says. There was Ziburius, and if there's Ziburius and Edius, and one field is qualitatively better than the other. Okay, did we just lose Dan? Yeah, 1 second. You're in the car. Dan, you're there? Dan, you back with us?
Yes, I'm sorry, I just cut out.
Yeah. So again, you saw from the Gemara that when there's a difference in quality of land, we right away don't apply but dinner bar mitzvah anymore. But I don't agree with you in apartments. Every apartment is unique. Every apartment is different. Again, we mentioned that there were shikunim. Okay, back in the 50s, they built shikunim. Every apartment in a block was identical.
Right.
After World War II, they built row houses.
Right.
Right? They built row houses. Okay, there you can maybe time it that
That's
they
what
go
we're
different
thinking.
this one down the block. But also, apparently, in those days, there were more land was more fungible and was more saleable and sold more often than apartments. Okay, I'm not again.
Okay,
It depends on the economy. Okay, let's open up the Rosh. So the Rosh is we want the Rosh, which is Perek. Right, we're in Perek Rishon. We're in the middle of not the middle, a little bit into Siman Mem Vav. Okay, so the Rosh is Siman Mem Vav. Okay, it starts with the Pshita. We're going to skip that part. And if you have an old-fashioned Rosh, I can't attest to where it's going to be in the newfangled Roshes. But in the old-fashioned Roshes, it's 2 lines from the bottom in the right column.
What
if you
page?
It's Mem Vav. It's on the pages in the old-fashioned Rosh. It's on page 360. But again, everybody should look Perek Rishon Siman Mem Vav. Okay, and we want to go about a quarter of the way into Mem Vav, where it starts with Ahu Dezavan Ara Ametzra de Beit Nasa. We're talking about the guy who owned a piece of property adjacent to his father's estate.
How does it begin?
Hahu Gavra, Hahu Dezavan Ara Ametzra de Beit Nasa.
Page 360, bottom.
If you have the old-fashioned Rosh, it's 2 lines from the bottom in the right column.
I got it. Okay.
Everybody see where we are? Okay. So it's the Gemara. Hahu Dezavan Ara Ametzra de Beit Nasa. Ki komefal ge'amar havuli ametzroi. Amar Rabba kegozeh kofen al minas dom. Maskif lo Rav Yosef. Motzi amar leim. Malin lecha kinichse de bar Miriam. What does that mean? Now we have to learn pshat. Okay, and again, this is where the issue comes up. Be'erish Rashi lan. Lanu hi chashuva ki karkaosav shel bar Miriam shehem chashuvos. Okay, so but the Rashi is going to give you a scenario where it's got to make sense. Can't just say it through through your yarmulke. Upirish de mayri bisade habaal upa'amim shezu mizbareches v'zu enem mizbareches. A field that's a function of that sometimes this field does better than a different field. Mishum de kashale amay yitzrich Rav Yosef lekaman lomer high midval v'high low midval lema mishum de ma'alena le kinichse de bar Miriam. In later Gemara, the reason Rav Yosef says that you can't activate Midas Dome is because one field gets better. It might get better irrigation than the other field. Says the Rosh. Why did he have to come onto one field is irrigated better, the other field is not irrigated as well? He should have very simply said, we evaluated. This was bothering Daniel before. We evaluated at $1 million. The assessor said 800,000. We think it's $1 million. So you see, no, you can't just say that stam. Okay, there's got to be some tangible indication of a higher value. Okay, therefore you could say that this field might get a bigger bracha. It's more accessible to the rain. It may we have stories. The famous story during Shemitah many Shemitas ago, where there was one field, 2 sides of the road near Komimiyut, where there wasn't much rain that year. And literally, it rained on one side of the street, and it didn't rain on the other side of the street. Okay, it's a documented story back in Komimiyut. I'm sorry, it was in Komimiyut, right? The field that had kept Shemitah lahalacha got rain, and the field across the street didn't get rain. We have that in Israel. Literally, you go a block or 2 away, and it's raining or not raining. Okay, so therefore, that could be a claim. That's how Rashi understands their claim. Okay, Ela b'sada habal shaykh l'meimer high taima. Shepamim shezu mizbareches v'zu eina mizbareches. Ki pamim hagishamim yordim al zeh, yosher al zeh. When a field needs rain, sometimes this field gets rain, sometimes that field gets rain. Masha'en came b'beis hashalchim, where it's purely irrigated. The kosher de bebeis hashalchin nami pamim shezeloke b'shidafon. So the Rashi, why did he need to go to that? Sometimes even irrigated fields, one gets the locust could come to this field and not to that field. There's so many variables. Therefore, Rabbeinu Tam didn't like that. And as Rabbeinu Tam didn't, Rashi made it that there has to be some objective indication of why one field might be better than the other. But the Rosh says, wait a minute. Then why did Rabbi Yosef have to indicate about the irrigated fields, that one field gets irrigated by the water troughs, the water wells, right? He could have said, well, this something, this one's better, this one's better. That doesn't work. So says Pirush Rabbeinu Tam, as we saw in Tosfos, Malin le anichse debar Marion Kolomer b'nei Marion hayu ashiri, v'lo hayu mochrin karko seyem ele b'damim yikari. They demanded premiums. You want my land, you got to give me a premium. All right. Kach lo nitan schus sheyesh lonu ba'osa sadeh im lo b'damim yikari. And therefore, since we have rights in the adjacent field, we're not going to let go of those rights unless we get a premium. That's the claim. We have rights. You want our rights? You want us to forego rights? We have a right to a premium. Vein b'zeh mishum miras dom, Daniel. Shaharei yesh lonu schus b'goral zeh. Shim yipol lonu hagoral ben shtei sodos. If there's a lottery and we get the field next to yours, what did we just win in the lottery? We won $100,000 field that we can now sell for 110. Right? Ben shtei salos harashus biyadenu shelo nachlif imcha im lo b'damim yikarim. If we would have won the adjacent field, you can't make us, and this relates back to Dan's question also, you can't come with a dinner to bar mitzvah to make us switch the fields and give you the adjacent field that we won in the lottery for our field in the middle. You can't make us do that. Oh, you want the adjacent field that we won in the lottery? Please, 110. So therefore, you can't make us forego that right in advance. Daniel, you hear why that's not a midas dom. It's financial rights that you're demanding I forego. Okay? Gamata nami ain't kan midas dom imein anu mevachlim chamkenu b'shvilcha. The Rabbah sover law the kofin al midas dom. Ve'enim yicholim lalos ot tasada lefi shahayom o lemocher im novo lemochra tikachena biyoter o tachlif b'shalonu be'ilu domim. What's going to happen? That in the future we might be able to act. That's not good enough to kivin she'ein chelik zeh shava yoser objectively mishar chalakim ela machmas metzranuso shel zeh ein lahem la'alosa mitam zeh. The only reason it has value, it's not inherent value. The only value is because of adjacency. It's not appropriate that they should jack up the price just because of adjacency. That's midas dom. Okay, the midas domu, but hilchos Rav Yosef. The malin le anichse de bar Marion, meaning they have the right to demand a premium if you want us to forego our rights to a lottery. Remember, I mean, the worst that will happen is there's going to be a lottery. The guy has a chance to get it, okay? But it says, you want us to forego the lottery? Got to pay us. Got to pay us. Hello, what? We'll have a lottery and we'll take our chances. Okay. So now look what's going to come. Kosav Rabbi Yonah Zal. In Pikeachu. Ruvain, who has the adjacency, if he's a smart guy, if he has a good lawyer, if he has a good financial advisor, look what he should come to the table with. So what are they saying? Oh, Ruvain, you want the adjacent field? We make you pay us 110. Pay us 110. You know what? Ruvain should go back with a counter offer. I'll give you 102. Oh, attempt tikne, or you buy it from you, or you give me 102. Mikivin shehem lo yirtzu ba, and they're certainly not want to give him 102. Okay, yitlenahu below goral. You know, you see what he's saying? He's saying, look, they want to squeeze Ruvain. They want to squeeze Ruvain. So Ruvain should come back with an offer to make them put money on the table, which they won't want to do, right? Because they don't care. They're not going to pay an extra 200,000. They don't want to pay 120,000 for a field that's really only worth 100. Okay, but they're making Ruvain pay 120 because to Ruvain is worth 120. So they're squeezing Ruvain. Ruvain, you want to pay us 120, and Ruvain says, you know what? If you want it, you pay me 105. And they certainly won't do that. And therefore, Reuven can get it for 105 without a goral. Okay? Below goral, but also ilu ilu b'chol makom mevatel hagoral kishachol kina'achin. There's another din. There's another din about goral. Okay? Anytime there are 3 fields that are going to be divided by goral, any brother has the right to stop the goral by putting extra money on the table. In other words, we have to assume that there's only a goral when they have 3 fields that are worth all the same. They have a goral. If one brother comes along and says, basically, we can turn the goral into a bidding war. Think about this. Again, but it makes a lot of sense. We can avoid the goral by turning it into a bidding war. There are 3 fields. And the assessor says each field is worth, you know what? Let's do office buildings. Okay? We have office buildings. Each office building is worth $10 million. And 3 office buildings are all the same, all of them worth $10 million. And one of the brothers wants a specific office building. Right? Whether he thinks that maybe this area is going to be a better area, whatever, he has the right to eliminate the goral by offering more money. What does it mean, offering more money? He's going to say, okay, each of these is worth $10 million. That's why we're doing a goral. I'm ready to put an extra $1 million on the table to get property A. You want to avoid the goral? You want to have a goral? You got to agree to put it on the same amount. Meaning, we're gonna negotiate who's ready to put money on the table to avoid the goral. That's something that brothers have the right to do, to avoid a goral. So therefore, this brother, Reuven, the bar mitzvah, he should put a number on the table that the brothers aren't willing to pay, and he'll win it without a goral.
But how does Bechor fit into the goral?
Nothing. That has nothing to do with Bechor. Nothing to do with Bechor. Nothing to do with Bechor. Bechor is a separate case.
So if one of them is Bechor, that has nothing to do with it. They can still.
Again, we're assuming right now everything after the case. The Bechor was one case. It was one unique special case. Okay, that was objective. Everything else now is talking about there's no Bechor. The first kid was a girl. Okay, now we have 3 brothers who are all equal. Everything else, okay. 3 brothers are all equal. Okay. Again, so you see here that Rabbeinu Yonah is coming up with an easy idea for him to avoid the goral. I lost my place. Yeah, okay, right. The kivan, shehem lo yirtzu bo yitnerahu below goral below so ilui lefi sheha ilui b'chol makom mevatel hagoral ukeshachol kina achim v'shamin achalakim ubo lachlok begoral yachol echad mehem la'alot echad min achalakim v'lomar ani eten bo kach v'kach yoser min hashuma o atem titnu bo kichach hazeh. There are 3 fields. And in theory, they should have a goral because each one's worth $100,000. One brother can come along and say, you know what? I'll take the field. I'll give you guys $5,000 extra for me to get this field. You want a goral? You also have to agree to do that. Okay? If they're not ready to match it, it's almost like a poker. It's almost like a poker game. All right? Each guy, I'm going to raise you. I'll raise you. I'll meet you. Okay? Until somebody says, okay, we're not ready, we're out. And then the guy who offered the highest price gets it without a goral. That makes a lot of sense. Why? No, everybody gains. Everybody gains. Reuven gets his field next to his, and Shimon and Levi get a little extra cash. All right. V'yesh mefarshim b'signon zeh hu deka'amar malin lekenichsi de barbarian. What it means is malin osa va'omer min kach v'kach yoser kol shumasa. When it says malin, the barbarian means they can decide on a premium. Who's ready to pay the premium? Or ani noten keshir hazeh v'noto below goral below sheda'ato liten kach ela shedaito la'alosa alav ve'ein loshen ilu. It doesn't sound like that's really what's going on. So we like Rabbeinu Yonah's idea very much. Rabbeinu Yonah's idea is that's not pshat. That's not called malin kebei merian. Malin kebei merian means they have a right to demand a premium if you want to get it without a goral. And Rabbeinu Yonah's response is a counter offer lower than what they're ready to put in, lower than what they think they're going to get, but more than they're ready to put in. Okay, and that'll solve the problem. Okay, all right. Any questions still here? Okay, we want to go now to the tour, but I don't think we want to start. Yeah, we have a few minutes. You guys have tour Kufa and Daled. We can at least start it today. Tour Kufa and Daled. Kosher Mishpach. Again, I hope everybody understands why this doesn't have anything to do with bar metzra. Bar metzra is a standalone din legislated asisa yasher vatov. Okay, so we want to open Kufa and we want to start with Kufa and Hay. Ironically, we're going to start first with Kufa and Hay, because Kufa and Hay actually is din de bar metzra. And we'll go back to Kufa and Dalet. Now, if you guys are really on the ball, we learned this when we were doing the sugyas of din de bar metzra. I even have it still marked off here in my tour, but I'm not sure how much you guys remember. Let's see what we want to do here. Okay. Yeah, so let's open up. Okay, Kufa and A has two parts. And we're going to do the second part. I don't know how your tour is set up, but the first part is really all of the details of bar metzra. Okay, and then Kufa and Hay. So it starts with Lo haya kan kol achim osel l'shmanenu, etc. But then it breaks with the halachos. It's called Hilchos Meitzranus, and it starts with Seif Hay. So we're in Kuf Ayin Hay, and it starts with Seif Hay. It starts Echad Me'achim. Everybody see that? Kuf Ayin Hay in the middle of Kuf. It's Seif Hay and Kuf Ayin Hay. Let's just do a few lines today, and we'll pick the rest up on Wednesday. So Echad Me'achim o min hashutfim shemacher chelko le'acher. Le'acher. All right. So there are three partners. All right, in a property. Okay, so each one owns a third of the property, and Reuven comes along and he sells his third to a stranger. He sells his third to a stranger. Okay, so echad min ha'achim o min hashutfim. The achim would mean before they divided up the estate, because once they divided up the estate, then they're not shutfim anymore. Okay, echad min ha'achim o min hashutfim. So it's either they have an estate before they divided it, or they're partners in a property. Shemachar chelko le'acher, shara shutfim misalkin lalokeach. Pashut that they can go give money to the buyer and say, "Have a good day." Now, by the way, this would be even this would not be limited to an agricultural field. This is not really the din of bar metzra. This is a din of somebody who buys in the middle of shutfim. It's misalkinan lev. Okay. V'afilu im kno hametzran. Wait a minute. So we've got three brothers, and they have shutfus in a property. And one of the partners sold his partnership to the guy who's adjacent to the big field. The other brothers can get rid of it. Afilu im kno hametzran. Kasav Adoni Avi Arozal shashutuf misalko. The cholzman shelo chilku yesh lo chelek biguf hasode. The adif tfemi metzran. V'chein kasav Rabbi Yehuda Barcelona. All right, what's the din of bar metzra? Bar metzra means I have a field adjacent to yours, and therefore, if I have a field adjacent to this, I should have the right to buy it before a stranger. But shutfim, they're not adjacent; they're in it. They're the most bar metzra of anybody else, and therefore, whoever you sell it to, even the bar metzra, the shutfim are more bar metzra. Okay, and therefore, they can even get rid of the bar metzra. They can get rid of even somebody who's adjacent, because as partners, they're inherently the maximum bar metzra. Everybody understand that din? Okay, we'll read a little more too, and then we'll come back to the Beis Yosef next time. Below me, boy, sheshutav misalik lilo keach ela filu hametzran misalko. Okay, how's that? Keep going. Reuven mocher sada l'shimo, the Levi. I'm sorry, Reuven mocher sada l'shimo. The Levi yesh lo sada etzel hasada hanimkar. Okay, so Reuven sells a field to Shimon, and Levi has adjacency. So Levi nosein hadomim lilo keach u'misalko. That's the regular din. Now we're back into the regular din of bar metzra. The Levi can give Shimon the money and get him off the field. The afilu shalokeach talmid chacham v'shachein v'korav lamocher. Okay, the buyer was a talmid chacham, and he was Reuven's cousin. Okay, hametzran am haaretz v'rochak min hamocher hametzran kodig misalkes halokeach. He's alluding to the fact that when the buyer, when the seller has two people to sell to, a Talmud Chacham and a relative, those are priorities. But the Metron always is the top priority. The Metron is always a top priority, and he trumps every other possibility of rights, except for the Shutfim themselves. Okay, we'll stop it here and pick this up with Kufay and Hay, and then we'll go back to Kufay and Dalet. So have your tour with us for Wednesday. Seder? Okay.
Okay.
All right. Everybody, Kol Tuv.